This is the GGJ Podcast, a show about the games industry, the people who make them, and the communities that grow up around them. I'm Susan Gold, a game education trailblazer and one of the founders of the Global Game Jam. Each week, we sit down with a new guest, highlighting their own path and journey. This is a space for honest conversation from makers about creativity, collaboration, failure, and the messy, the beautiful reality of making games. So whether you're a young dev or seasoned, an educator, a student, or someone who just loves games and the people behind them, welcome to the GGJ Podcast. Take a breath, settle in, and let's hear directly from the makers themselves.
This episode is made possible in partnership with the Global Game Jam, the world's largest game creation event, bringing together creators from around the globe. A big thank you as well to the Global Game Jam's headline sponsors, Epic Games, Games for Change, and Xsola, for helping make this creative community a reality. To learn more and to get involved in the upcoming jams, visit globalgamejam.org. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Global Game Jam podcast. My name is Shirley, and I am your producer / editor / behind the scenes lurker, if you will. And today is our very first episode. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on this new adventure. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be here today with Susan Gold, the regular host for this podcast, as well as a co-founder of the Global Game Jam. We decided to have this first episode be a little bit different than what you can expect of the rest of the season, because we thought it important for you to get to know Susan a little bit better and to hear directly from her how the Global Game Jam began and why this podcast is important. And without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Susan Gold. How are you doing, Susan?
Well, I am super excited. This is Game Jam weekend, so I'm super excited to see what happens this weekend around the world. One of my favorite things I've always, as a part of the Global Game Jam, is just that watching as games start coming in, as people start uploading things and you start hearing stories around the world, and then that slow evolution. Did you hear what they did in Australia? Oh, really? Oh my God. What happened in Serbia? Okay. What? And so that whole global part of that unraveling of what's been happening over the course of the weekend is probably one of the most exciting times for GGJ.
And what number of Global Game Jam is this? How many years has this been going?
So we started in 2009, and actually this year, over 500,000 people will have participated, which is kind of crazy.
No, that's insane. That's straight up insane.
When I think about the fact that there are all these people coming together because I had this crazy idea, that's the part that always just kind of blows me away. It's like, well, I had this idea and I talked to a few people, and then, who told somebody, and it just became this huge thing that everyone wanted to participate in. And over these years, as it's evolved, I've seen, growth. I've seen, more and more countries participate. That's all good. But I think the thing is, when I know people that are like, oh, we're jam hopping. Like this year we're in Amsterdam, and next year we're in Romania, and next year we'll be in Bogota. And you're like, what? And people like to jam that much, or people that have met each other and married at the jam. One of my best friends met his wife at the Global Game Jam. I'm so proud that people could come together, which is what it was all about. Creating community, finding other people like us, and people that were interested in creating. There's something so exciting about being in that creative engine, and everybody's in it together and watching it all unfurl in front of you. And you're like, wow, look at all the genius around the world, and creativity and silliness and effort.
So let's do the math. You said that the first Game Jam was, what year was it?
2009.
2009. So that means that this year is 10, it's 16 years.
No,
This is the number 16.
it's 17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. 17 global game jams, 17 opportunities the world has had to come together to create video games.
That's the other part of it. It's not just like the usual suspects. It's I had no idea that someone was going to be making games in Uganda. Like who would have thought?
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit, because I don't know about our listeners, but at least I am dying to know, how did the Global Game Jam start? So this question has multiple parts. The first thing that I want to know is, what is your background? Like, how are you the co-founder of the Global Game Jam? That is the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, what was that spark that was like, oh, you know what we should do? We should have a game jam that all of these people around the world participate once a year. So please
Okay.
tell us.
First of all, educator, first and foremost. And I had been teaching students game design, and they could never finish a game in the time period of a semester. Now, you have to remember, we had to make our own game engines at the time. Or if we were using an engine, then there was a huge learning curve with coding, and you had to be able to really be very skilled. Well, someone just out of high school coming to university at that time, they weren't making their own games at home. No one was making their own game. People were like, oh, I made an engine. And then over the course of several years, made a game. When I had the occasion to go to Sweden to attend a conference for education, met the guys from Nordic Game Jam. When I met them, I saw what you could do in 48 hours. And then I tied that to this experience I had had, which was this crazy experience. It was a music experience. Um, Someone was in Brussels and they were mixing, and then someone was in Montreal and they were mixing, and we were dancing wherever we were in the world to the same music that people in Montreal. And I'm like, we're connected. We're all in this same energy vibe. And I thought, how could I make that happen globally? And so you see this event, Nordic Game Jam, and I'm like, you can make games in 48 hours. And so I approached them and I said, what if we did this together around the world simultaneously? And they laughed at me. And I said, okay. I never think small, Shirley. I really never think small. I only think enormous. And I just said, well, I think I can do this. One of them came back, Gorm, and said, this is an interesting idea I'd like to explore. I got home, talked to my friend Ian. Ian is like, oh, absolutely, we could do this. Pull Gorm in. Hey, Gorm, let's start a company, our own nonprofit, our own whatever. Okay, what are we going to call it? And we went through a few, and we came up with Global Game Jam. And then that was August 2008, July, August 2008. And I went to SIGGRAPH, and I just chased people down, because SIGGRAPH at the time was one of the biggest places where you would meet artists and other people working in the digital arts. And they would come from every continent. And I was like, I'm going to have Global Game Jam on every continent. That was my goal. I chased Africa. And in the beginning, how do you know someone at the University of Johannesburg? How do you, like, you have to remember the internet was not brand
You know, 2009, those were like the beginnings of YouTube, the beginnings of, I think, Facebook was just a few years old. Instagram hadn't even launched yet in
no.
2009.
Exactly. So I Skyped everybody at the time. That was like the biggest thing. We did IRC chat. We were old school because we wanted everybody to be able to participate. It didn't matter what if you had a computer. that was as sophisticated as mine in the States. I was just happy that people were signing on from I don't know where, a stan, like it would be like, where are you from? Oh, okay. We'd love to have you. And then I would be like, look at how many, and I would have this Excel sheet of how many countries. And then we started doing this global map. And then all of a sudden it was 115 countries over several years. And I think the pinnacle of it was like we had girls in Afghanistan coding. That to me was the high point. And subsequently, we've had COVID, we've had a whole bunch of things. But the one thing about the Global Game Jam is that it's a way to create community where there was none. I lived and grew up in Chicago, and we didn't have a really big IGDA presence here. There was no organizational stuff. Everything was coast. You had to be on the coast. And that was how I was thinking, how do I create communities? I know there are other people that want to make games. How do I make it accessible for them? At the time, the democratization of software was non existent. There was no software. Unity came around and they were still in a garage. And David Helgelson, he shared Unity licenses for people for the first Global Game Jam that allowed people to use the first version of Unity, It was like that was how novel and new things were. Making 3D objects took time, was exhausting, Oh, so we didn't have a lot of 3D games in the beginning. Now we do. Now those tools are available to us and everything is accessible. Before it used to cost a lot of money. Before you had to have all these hardware requirements. Now you don't have any of those things. Now you could just jump on your phone and make a game. It's that
Pretty
easy.
much, yeah. And I think that the Global Game Jam as a community building tool is truly effective. I come from Puerto Rico, and at some point, the Global Game Jam was the only game creation related event that we had on the island for a few years. And the fact that anyone around the world can approach the Global Game Jam and be like, hey, we would love to have a site for the Global Game Jam and participate, that really allows pretty much anyone anywhere in the world to just jump in and connect with this global community of people who are incredibly passionate about video games, people who are usually in their early career and who might not just stay in the industry, but also just create a hit game. And actually, there have been plenty of games that start at the Global Game Jam that later become publishable.
So things like Surgeon Simulator, um, even a small mechanic that they start to play with during the global game jam, and then they're like, oh, this is going to be the basis of my game. So they're able to build on things that they created at global game jam. Other things that are created at global game jam are relationships. uh, so many people have found a spouse or a business partner or created a studio because they didn't even know anyone in town was making games, and then, oh wow, there are other people like me, and then they find someone that just connects with them. That's been an amazing experience. Additionally, besides relationships growing in studios, I think it's given people the ability to say that they could do it. Like, oh, I did it. Like, it took me a while for me not to have imposter syndrome, right? I think all of us do. But once you do it a few times, you're like, well, maybe I am a game designer. Maybe I can do this for a living. Those are the things that excite me and that come out of Global Game Jam. Not just relationships, but your own confidence. That's something that's really hard to find. Um, you test yourself. It's a challenge. It's not necessarily going to always be this much fun. because global game jams are fun, you know. But if this is something that you love and you want to make it a living, this is a way to taste to see if you have, you know, a taste for it, a real taste for it. Like, could you imagine yourself doing this every day for the rest of your life? Some people, like myself, when I was doing an internship, I found out how much I hated what I was doing. And I'm like, get me out of here. Well, this is a perfect time. You know, is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Is this how you imagine being creative? Is this how you imagine telling stories?
Yeah, no, and the Global Game Jam definitely is just a place to go all out and find your place in the industry. If you're like just early career, if you're starting, like exactly what you want to do, if you want to do narrative design, if you want to do art, if you want to program, is the perfect opportunity to try it out. Now, but the Global Game Jam has transformed, right, from those early days in 2009 all the way 17 iterations later into a global organization. And I'm just wondering, like, how has that changed the Global Game Jam, going from this little, I mean, not little, doing the Global Game Jam is an enormous effort, but going from, we're going to do this thing to suddenly becoming this
Nonprofit?
globally nonprofit, worldly recognized organization with board members, with a CEO, with
Yeah.
like hundreds of volunteers from across the world.
Well,
Like,
so first of all, it was an all volunteer organization for the longest time. And then when we really were growing, I said we need an executive director and we need to be able to pay for them. We need to really start thinking about raising funds and providing opportunities. We had some really amazing board members who brought up really good ideas and initiatives so that the community could participate. We always had things like Global Game Jams scholarships, opportunities to go to conferences, provide opportunities that people would have never had before, that kind of thing. And when I retired in 2020, the Global Game Jam continued to evolve, continue to grow. I had to deal with COVID, had to deal with the realities of the world post COVID, had to raise money during COVID, all of those crazy things. But as an organization, it now has amazing executive director. It has a really substantial board of people that are giving of their time. And all those people, except for like the executive director and then a couple of community people, everybody else is a volunteer. So all of my work for all those years, I was a volunteer. Everybody that comes to the Global Game Jam is doing it out of the passion for games, out of passion for seeing people learn, watching them experiment. You know, you were talking before about how, community development. I've been to countries where because of the Global Game Jam, it started studios, which then became an actual part of the government's economy. Similarly, in other countries, they realize what a cultural resource this is, as well as opportunity for people education wise, but just in a way for people to be expressive in their own cultures. That's another amazing thing.
is there like an impact report or like an impact something that has been created of the Global Game Jam impact across the years?
I am not sure what is current. I used to do like a one pager, like how many people participated, how many people were male, female, you know, chose not to answer. We would gather demographic stuff. We would ask people, do you want to participate? And I think again, after they did it once, and if time permitted, because that's also another thing, 48 hours is a lot to ask of someone to take out of their life. But if time permits, I think they say 99% of people would do another global game jam, which I always think says a lot about the event. It's not that, and I think the 1% of people are probably that don't like the global game jam. I mean, that's a really small amount. So I think we've done a good job, and we keep trying to answer. And I know that the current board and current executive director continually try to answer the challenges that are presented.
Because the global game jam has been going on for so many years, it'd be fascinating to know how many of the people who are currently in the industry, or if there is like a percentage or a number that we can be like, hey, this percentage of the current industry has participated at some point in the global game jam,
Well,
or maybe they were inspired to stay in the industry because of the global game jam. Because Susan, here's the thing: I think, and I have to say that I think, because of course I don't have like
that
data to back it up, but I think that the global game jam is the most important event in the video games industry when it comes to bringing people into the industry. It is also probably I mean, it's just the most important event, period, because it's doing so many things at the same time and it's so impactful. And the thing is that in a world where everything is numbers, and even my first instinct was like, so is there like a report that we can like point to? But no, these are intangible things, right? I don't think that we will ever be able to truly understand the impact that the global game jam has had, in not just in the industry like itself, but also in the creative industries around the world. But that brings me to my next, to the next point, which is like, you mentioned that you retired in 2020. But if you retire in 2020, what are we doing here? Like, what is this podcast? Why are you and I here? And even though I have to underline the fact that for most part, I'm going to be lurking behind the scenes, this is a new project for you. So tell us more about that.
okay. So the GGJ podcast really came about as I was reflecting, like, what else can I do? All right, I'm not teaching anymore. I know all of these people in the world that have made such a positive effect on my life, have been my mentors, have really helped me and guided me. And I thought, well, I should try to be that for people. I would like to find a way to mentor in some way. And then I had to take into the fact one of my job descriptions, well, every job description that I've ever had, Susan does whatever, blah, 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 blah. She knows everybody. And then I'm like, I know a lot of people. True. I do know a lot of people. And then if you look at my LinkedIn, you're like, whoa, she knows a lot of people in the game industry. And I know people in education, and I know people in entertainment, and I know people in food, And so like I know people across many different spectrums, right? And then I'm like, but what if I could bring these people in with their really interesting stories, with their origin stories, with their histories, and I could share that with everyone? Because one of the things that I encountered, people were like, how did you do that? How did you do that? And I'm like, well, I just did it. I don't know. I just did it. And that was always my answer. I just did it. Right. And then all of a sudden I thought, what if I asked other people, how'd you do that? And it's interesting, but most of them are also, I just did it, But what I thought I could do is I could share those stories. I can share the interesting paths that people take, the pivots. We have all in this industry, games in general, have had to learn how to pivot, be it learning a new technology, a new platform, a new style. Whatever it is, we have had to learn it always on the run. I have a saying, well, let's build a plane while flying it. Sure. That's okay. I'm a decent pilot, you know. I know I've got the basics, right? And I'm always full of hot air. So I can float. But what if I could bring these stories to people and I could share them and I can say, here's somebody that came from where, the middle of nowhere, and you were in a refugee camp and you taught yourself how to code. Oh, I think someone needs to hear your story. Like I want to share those with you. And I want you to see that even when people have all the confidence in the world and all the experience, they end up unemployed. And we always have to learn how to adjust. And that's just the way of this industry, but it's also a way of the world. And what I wanted to share and what I wanted people to see was that we've all had to figure out how to jump through hoops of fire. We've had to learn how to build it while flying it. We've had to reinvent ourselves a million times. And look at us. Look at all that we've accomplished. And I wanted people to see that and share that with me. So I invited people from all over the industry to share their oral histories, to tell me a little bit about their lives, their origins, and additionally, tell me where you screwed up. Tell me where you thought, "Oh my god, I am forever going to be this or I'm forever going to be that." But instead, you're like, "No, I'm going to take the reins. I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to be the person that makes those decisions." Well, I want to know why you decided you could do it, And so one of my favorite lines from my interviews is, "Well, if a mediocre white guy could do it, so could I." And I honestly, I want that kind of spirit, that wisdom and energy to be like, that's what I want to share with everyone. That's what I want people to hear. I call it the chutzpah of it. I call it, the audacity, the resilience. That's what I want to share. And when I introduce you to some of these people, you'll know who they are. They're famous. They've been in magazines and covers, and people talk about them. They're at GDC. And then people you've never met, people you might never encounter. But what I want everyone to see is that I'm going to start something. That moment when someone says, "Yep, this is me. I'm doing it. I'm moving forward. I have a plan. I have a vision." And I figure if I show you enough people that created plans and visions where you wouldn't even imagine that they could, you know, I look at their story and I'm like, how you got yourself from there to here, I need to share. I need other people to be as motivated, as driven, as in love with video games as the people that we're going to introduce you are. And that's the exciting part. I get to introduce the Global Game Jam community to people they may not have met, but they may have played their game. Or if they haven't played their game, maybe they want to play their game now because you met them.
Is there anyone that you're like, oof, I really want to interview this person, or oof, I really think that the GGJ pod audience could benefit from listening to this story?
So there was somebody that I really, really wanted. And I approached them and they said yes. So they're going to be our last interview,
The last of the season?
the last of our season. So there are
Oh, I'm excited. I just for the record, I have no idea who this person is.
so there I've known them for a very long time. So I'm super excited to be able to share that story. It's an origin story and it's also a resilience story. And at the same time, it's a triumphant story.
And how do you hope that this podcast is going to evolve over time? Or what is your vision for the podcast?
So the podcast is two things. One, it's for the community, but another is for me and my own desire to constantly be learning. And yeah, there are people that I have met that I would love to share, but then at the same time, there are people that, their lives are very quiet. And having a little peek at that might be really interesting to know that there's a way to make a living in this industry and have a normal life. You know, there was a moment before I started talking to you about doing the podcast where I was like, I hate our industry. Look at how many people are getting let go. There's no future. There's no. And I was just so depressed and so angry. Like, why is this happening? We're a creative industry and it should just be evolving and growing, not trimming and cutting size of creative people. And I was like, I'm mad. I don't want to have anything to do with games. That was when I was entertaining, well, let's do a travel podcast. But the truth is, the Global Game Jam has been my life. It hasn't been everything I've done, but I do feel like it's everything I've worked towards. And the fact that it continues without me is such a blessing and so exciting.
And I think that's the dream, right? That's what you want. When you create something, you want it to take a life of its own. You want it to be able to continue without you so that you can move on to other projects and do other things. But the fact that the Global Game Jam is able to continue is great. I did want to mention though that the podcast is not just a podcast; it's also a Substack
Oh, yeah.
that goes with the podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
I have always been a writer. I enjoy writing. I would write short stories, things like that. And I was talking to one of the people we were interviewing, and he's like, "You should do a Substack." And I'm like, "What? What? What?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You write. You should do a Substack." And so I went on Substack, and I was like, "Ooh, there's really good stories here." I really like. I am not a person who enjoys social media. It's not my thing. But a long form essay, I can get into that. I really have some things I want to say, but I also like takeaways from the actual conversations that I've had that I want to be able to talk about. I want to be able to bring them into my world and synthesize it and talk about those takeaways.
So we're running out of time, but before we go, I just want to ask, what does the future hold for Susan Gold? What is the future for the GGJ podcast? What is the future for the Global Game Jam? Or at least what are your thoughts around that?
Well, so for GGJ, I don't have anything to do other than encourage and recommend. But the future of our podcast, I hope, is one that is constantly evolving, that we grow as we meet new people. Maybe like right now it's all about these oral histories, but maybe we'll find like an idea that we want to explore a little more, and maybe we'll go down that avenue. I don't know. I have enjoyed all of the conversations that I've had so far. What I'm finding most intriguing is like doing the research, creating story arcs, finding ways for things to flow well for the conversation. My hope for the future is that I become a little more comfortable in front of the camera, talking, fewer filler words, those types of things. But beyond that, my hope is that it becomes the kind of storytelling, that people want to share, that people want to be like, did you hear the story of so and so and how they overcame all the same things that we have? All of the troubles, the maybe lack of government funding, maybe in another place. Like we had this amazing conversation, if you remember, of a hyper local game designer making games for their location. I want to explore more of that. I want to see the people that are creating new genres. I want to explore what's going to happen next. I started in video games before mobile was a thing. We have moved from PC and platform only, mobile to AR, VR. What's going to be next? That is what I want to be able to share with people, the people that are coming up with the ideas of what's next, but also the people that are making games for what's next.
Amazing. Well, Susan, I think that's a wrap to our audience. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is the very first episode of the Global Game Jam podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes down the line. Also, please go ahead and check out Susan's Substack. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add, Susan?
Well, I just want to encourage everyone to make games. Don't be afraid to fail and to constantly say, I'm going to try. That's all you have to do. That's all the Game Jam is about. Just accepting that you're willing to try.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Want to get involved with the GGJ podcast? We'd love to hear from you. Please send your ideas, suggestions, and questions to ggjpod@globalgamejam.org. And tell us who you think we should be talking to next. What stories or issues matter most to you about the future of games, and help us highlight the people and practices that make a sustainable creative life in games possible. Thank you for spending time with us on the GGJ podcast. If this conversation sparked something for you, please share it with someone who might find it useful. And don't forget to follow along so you never miss new stories from makers around the world. You can find more episodes, resources, and information about the Global Game Jam at globalgamejam.org. Catch us on Substack and on YouTube and anywhere else you find podcasts. This has been the GGJ Podcast. Thanks for listening and keep making games.